He is a 42-year-old corporate executive who achieved the American dream 2 decades ahead of schedule. After years of chasing promotions and accumulating wealth, he finally admits the truth. He despises the expensive house, the demanding career, and the stable life he worked so hard to build. When the crushing weight of existential dread pushes him to a breaking point, he needs to liquidate his assets and walk away to pursue the forgotten dreams of his youth before the inertia of success makes real change impossible. But the financial obligations, his wife's complete dependence on their current status, and the terrifying question of whether it is truly too late to start over, threaten to keep him permanently chained to the gilded cage. The alarm used to be a cue. Now it's an interruption. Not an interruption of sleep, but an interruption of the brief, beautiful peace that exists between 4 a.m. and 6:30 a.m., before the machinery of the day starts grinding. I am 42. I have the house, the title, the kind of professional stability that my parents considered the pinnacle of life achievement. If you saw the portfolio, you'd see a success story. If you looked closely at my eyes when I pour that first cup of coffee, you'd see the exhaustion of a marathon runner who crossed the finish line, only to realize the race was just the qualification round. The exhaustion is not physical. I sleep 8 hours. It's the deep structural fatigue of maintaining a lie that has become too expensive to dismantle. I worked so hard to build this life. That's the part that hurts the most. Every late night, every strategic sacrifice, every networking dinner where I swallowed my actual opinions, it was all directed toward this exact point. This view from this third-floor window, this perfectly manicured lawn, this 2-car garage containing 2 reliable, boring German cars. And every morning, standing here, the only thing I can feel is the desperate urge to walk away from it all and change my name. It's not drama, it's just math. I look at the calendar and calculate the remaining years until actual retirement. And that number, 23, feels like a life sentence handed down by a judge who doesn't understand that the crime was self-inflicted. The frustration is silent. It has to be. You can't tell your partner, or your kids, or your board of directors that the entire foundation you built together is rotten, not because of external failure, but because of internal disinterest. You can't admit that the goal you chased, the one everyone applauded you for catching, tastes like ash. So, I perform. I answer the emails efficiently. I nod during Zoom calls. I use the corporate vernacular with practiced ease, but inside, I am monitoring the clock, not for productivity, but for survival. I am waiting for 5 p.m., and then waiting for the next morning to start waiting again. It's the great loop of the established professional life. We talk about burnout as if it's a sudden fire. For those of us over 40, who have been doing this for 2 decades, it's not fire. It's slow erosion. It's the constant drip, drip, drip of minor compromises until you look up and realize the person staring back from the mirror is someone you tolerate, but no longer recognize. I remember distinctly when the shift happened. It wasn't a crisis. It was a Tuesday. I was 38. I had just closed the biggest deal of my career, the kind of deal that guarantees the next 3 years of financial comfort. I walked into my office, sat down, and the expected rush of triumph never materialized. There was nothing. Just the silence of the expensive air conditioning and the realization that achieving the impossible felt exactly the same as failing miserably. That day, the goalposts didn't just move, they disappeared entirely. Since then, the only thing driving me is inertia. The momentum of the system I created keeps me going forward, like a remote-controlled car that doesn't know the operator left the room 4 years ago. The problem with inertia is that stopping requires immense effort, and effort is the one thing I no longer have left to give to this life. The deeper problem is the fear of being seen as ungrateful. I have friends struggling paycheck to paycheck. I have colleagues dealing with real tragedy. And here I am, the privileged idiot, suffocating under the weight of stability. How do you explain to the world, or even yourself, that your greatest blessing is your heaviest burden? So I keep the mask on. I smile at the neighbors when they talk about the new patio furniture. I discuss interest rates with my spouse over dinner, projecting confidence and control. But when I'm alone, waiting in traffic or showering, the question keeps surfacing, heavy and cold. Is this it? Is this all there is after all that climbing? The truth is, I don't hate my life. I hate the script. I hate the predictability of the next 20 years outlined in the financial plan, the career trajectory mapped out by HR, the weekend routine dictated by youth sports schedules. I hate the total absence of spontaneity, the feeling that every move I make is dictated by the maintenance of the structure, not by the desire to live inside it. I've started searching, not for a new job, but for an exit ramp. Something that doesn't involve setting fire to everything I own. Something that acknowledges the sunk cost without insisting I stay sinking. But every alternative looks too risky, too exhausting to start from scratch. And that's the final brutal realization of 42. It's not just that I hate the life I built. It's that I am genuinely terrified that it is too late to build anything else. That the elasticity of youth is gone, and I am now brittle, defined by the concrete I poured 2 decades ago. I know I need to move, but I feel bolted to the floor. The first step, I realized, wasn't leaving the house. It was acknowledging the desperation silently, right here, right now. Just stop pretending I enjoy the view. The terror isn't abstract. It's practical, tied to the mortgage rate and the kids' college funds. The elasticity I mourn isn't physical, it's relational. At 25, you could fail spectacularly, and the collateral damage was limited to a few credit card bills and a shared apartment lease. At 42, the failure is communal. It involves disrupting the stability of 4 other lives who didn't ask for this emotional earthquake. This is why we stay bolted down. We call it responsibility. We tell ourselves it's love. But sometimes, when the light hits the office window just right, it looks exactly like cowardice. I stopped pretending that day, but only internally. The external performance had to continue, because the audience was already seated. The real exhaustion of middle age is not the volume of work, but the maintenance of the facade. Every handshake, every Zoom call, every polite dinner conversation with neighbors becomes a layer of expensive, fragile varnish applied over a core that is actively decaying. You become fiercely protective of the lie. If someone asks, "How are things?" you don't hear a question, you hear a demand for reassurance. They need you to be okay because their own sense of the world's stability is subtly linked to your success. You are the pillar they point to. He made it. See? It works. And if the pillar crumbles, the whole mental architecture of the neighborhood shifts. That weight, the responsibility of being the successful benchmark, is heavier than any corporate deadline. I started analyzing the objects around me, the trophies I'd chased. The corner office wasn't a reward. It was a high-visibility cage. The watch on my wrist wasn't a timepiece. It was a timestamp of the moment I sold my flexibility for something solid and permanent. They weren't achievements. They were anchors cemented into bedrock I no longer recognized. The silent frustration turned into a constant, low-grade hum. It manifests in microaggressions against my own schedule. I started taking 20 minutes longer in the garage before coming inside, just sitting in the parked car, not listening to anything, just existing in the silence between 2 worlds, the high-achieving public one and the privately unraveling one. It's the only true solitude left. The house is full of life and demands. The dog needs walking, the emails need answering, the spouse needs connection. But the garage, that pressurized liminal space between the commute and the comfort, that's where the mask comes off for exactly 1,200 seconds. I realized my biggest fear wasn't poverty or public failure. My biggest fear was having to sit down and articulate this feeling to my partner. How do you tell the person who based their retirement projections on your current trajectory that the trajectory is now meaningless to you? That the man who built this life, this beautiful golden trap, is gone, and the one left behind doesn't know how to dismantle it gently? That conversation, the one where you admit you spent 20 years climbing the wrong mountain, is the one that paralyzes you. It's easier to stay on the mountain, shivering, hating the altitude, than to admit you need to go back down, carrying the ruins of the climb, and start over from base camp. This isn't the youthful fantasy of running away to find yourself. This is structural demolition. You don't just quit the job. You quit the zip code, the school board, the entire operating system of your family. The cost is calculated not in dollars, but in sleepless nights for others. So I stay. I calculate. I wait for the perfect damage-free moment to speak up. But the damage-free moment doesn't exist. There is always a big project, a major expense, a looming milestone. The gate is never truly open. It's always locked, and I'm holding the key, too afraid to turn it, because of the noise it will make. The silent desperation continues, fed by the knowledge that every day I stay here. The concrete sets a little harder around my feet. The concrete hardened. Yes. But it wasn't just around my feet. It was setting in my chest, a dull, dense weight that made shallow breathing the new normal. The silent desperation wasn't quiet anymore. It was a hum, a low-frequency vibration that only I could detect, shaking the foundations of my performance. Because that's what this existence became, a performance. Every morning, I put on the suit, the tie, and the face of the successful 42-year-old man who loved his trajectory. I practiced the slight affirming nod for the video calls and the confident forward-leaning posture for the boardroom. My job wasn't managing assets. It was managing perception. I sold the lie that I was energized by the grind, that the long hours were a sign of passion, not servitude. My wife, Sarah, saw the exhaustion, but she misinterpreted the cause. She attributed the bags under my eyes to the market instability, or the last major merger. She saw the stress as the required tax of success. She was a beneficiary of the structure I had built, relying on its solid, predictable strength. If I faltered, she saw the whole system falter. The college funds, the mortgage, the annual trip, that defined our stability to the outside world. The conversations we had were less about us and more about the maintenance of us. We discussed logistics, schedules, who needed what form signed. We were excellent co-CEOs of the family machine, but we had forgotten what it felt like to be partners. Intimacy became transactional, a hurried footnote at the end of a long day, usually abandoned because one of us had an early start or a late report to finish. The silence between us wasn't comfortable. It was the vast, open space where shared vulnerability used to live. We were professionals, even in our marriage, prioritizing efficiency over connection. I started looking for small leaks in the dam, tiny ways to relieve the pressure without causing the flood. I bought a ridiculously expensive espresso machine, convinced that the ritual of grinding the perfect bean would restore meaning. It didn't. I took up running, trying to outpace the anxiety, only to realize that the moment I stopped moving, the despair caught up instantly. These were not fixes. They were distractions, carefully chosen consumer goods meant to paper over a soul problem. The body, however, is the honest accountant. It keeps the ledger when the mind refuses. I began experiencing true insomnia, not the kind where you are thinking about work, but the kind where your body is simply too tense to surrender. I would lie awake from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m., the quietest hours of the night, when the city and my family were finally still. In that profound silence, the hum of desperation became a roar. I would stare at the ceiling, analyzing the precise moment I had taken the wrong turn. Was it the decision to chase the promotion 10 years ago? Was it when I said yes to the second mortgage? It wasn't a single moment. It was 1,000 micro yeses to things I didn't want, all for the sake of the next incremental step on the ladder I now knew was leaning against the wrong building. One Tuesday, I was sitting in my car in the company parking garage. The fluorescent lights hummed above me, mirroring the sound in my head. I had just finished an important call where I had successfully navigated a difficult client, delivering an outcome that earned the firm a 7-figure fee. Success. I sat there, hand resting on the steering wheel, and I realized I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, no pride. Just emptiness, vast and sterile. I looked down at my hands, the hands that shook hands, signed documents, and typed emails that moved millions of dollars around the world. They felt foreign, like tools belonging to someone else. I tried to lift my hand to scratch my forehead, but the effort felt insurmountable. It wasn't physical paralysis. It was a sudden, absolute spiritual shutdown. The engine of me had seized. I remember thinking, with terrible clarity, I am too successful to quit and too tired to continue. I didn't drive away. I didn't even turn off the engine. I just sat there, breathing shallowly, performing one last desperate act of rebellion, wasting 10 minutes of highly productive time, doing absolutely nothing, staring at the concrete wall of the parking garage, waiting for the feeling to pass so I could put the mask back on and re-enter the performance. The silent scream was finally echoing off the polished chrome of the luxury sedan I thought I wanted. And I knew, truly knew, that the calculated risk of leaving this life was terrifying. But the certainty of staying was far worse. The question was no longer if I could survive the change, but how long I could survive the inertia. I didn't wait for the feeling to pass. I just learned to compress it. That's the real skill you acquire after 40, compressing existential dread into a small, hard knot you carry right below the sternum. You learn to drive with it, eat with it, and deliver a convincing presentation while it sits there, heavy and cold. I put the car in reverse. The quarterly review dinner was scheduled for 7. Performance was required. The cost of this life wasn't measured in the mortgage or the private school tuition, though those were the practical chains. The real cost was the sheer volume of mental energy required to maintain the narrative. I had to be the guy who loved the strategy meetings, the guy who genuinely enjoyed discussing asset allocation, the guy who believed the mission statement plastered on the lobby wall. My wife, Sarah, didn't ask if I was happy anymore. She asked if the bonus structure was favorable this quarter. She operated under the sacred assumption that my stress was the necessary collateral for her security. We built this elaborate dual existence where my success defined her safety, and my exhaustion was just the price of admission. If I pulled the plug, I wouldn't just be disrupting my own life. I would be demolishing the entire foundation of our shared reality. The idea of telling her, I hate the money, I hate the travel, I hate the respect I earned doing something I despise, felt like the ultimate act of betrayal. Every choice I made between 25 and 35 was a vote for this magnificent gilded cell. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel, manicured and clean, hands that hadn't built anything tangible in 2 decades. I remembered the kid who started out, the one who wanted to work with his hands, who thought success meant creating value, not just managing risk for other people's capital. He was full of fire, cheap beer, and inconvenient ideals. I had systematically betrayed that kid for a better 401k match, year after year, vote by vote. The inertia wasn't just financial, it was relational. If I walked, who would I become? Not just to Sarah, but to the industry, to the men I led, to the junior associates who saw me as the end point, the proof that the grind pays off. I would be a cautionary tale, the successful guy who cracked, the one who couldn't handle the pressure. And maybe that's what bothered me most. The judgment, the whispering that I was weak, that I didn't appreciate the privilege. They didn't see that the privilege itself was the trap. The dinner was exactly as expected. Polished wood, soft lighting, expensive wine that tasted like obligation. I sat across from the CEO and navigated the conversation, hitting all the required notes: commitment, scaling, disruptive innovation. I could hear myself talking, and the man speaking sounded like a perfect functional robot. The greatest cost of all this was the silence, the constant internal filtering. When I got home that night, late, Sarah was already asleep. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, looking at the life we had constructed, the heavy furniture, the professional, photographs, the quiet, expensive sleep. If I woke her up and told her the truth, the raw, ugly fact that I felt like a highly paid corpse, the entire structure would shake. So I kept quiet. This silence wasn't protective. It was corrosive. It consumed the mental real estate where joy used to live. It was the daily, slow realization that the only person who truly understood the depth of my exhaustion was the man staring back at me in the bathroom mirror, and he was just as exhausted from keeping the secret. I realized then that the fear of leaving wasn't the fear of poverty. It was the fear of being truly known. Known as the failure, the man who earned everything he thought he wanted, only to discover that the prize was hollow, and that the only way out required admitting that the last 20 years were a magnificent, beautifully executed mistake. The question was no longer, is it too late? The question was, do I have the courage to start telling the truth, one small, terrifying word at a time? Because that's where the real fight starts. Not with the market, but with the man in the mirror. The truth wasn't a single, explosive moment. It was an acid drip. It worked on the foundation until the whole structure leaned, imperceptibly at first. The courage required to speak that first terrifying word wasn't about yelling a resignation in a boardroom. It was about whispering, "I'm not okay," in the kitchen at 8 p.m., knowing the echo would shatter 20 years of carefully constructed silence. He got home, and the house felt wrong. Not messy, not quiet, but heavy. It was the perfect house, purchased at the perfect peak, designed to absorb the sound of success. But the walls felt thin now, unable to contain the noise in his own head. His wife, Maria, was in the living room, ostensibly scrolling through her tablet, but really waiting. Waiting for the decompression, the ritual where he shed the professional skin, drank the wine, and delivered the day's edited highlights. She didn't demand much, just competence and consistency. Those were the two pillars he was struggling most to uphold. He looked at her, and the distance between them felt like two distinct time zones. He loved her. That was the terrible part. He didn't want to hurt her. He wanted to preserve her faith in the stability he represented, the stability he was now planning, in his mind, to dismantle. She looked up. Rough day? He gave the habitual answer, the one that meant busy, important, tiring, but profitable. Standard, lot of moving parts. She nodded, satisfied. That was the language they spoke. Moving parts, profit margins, next quarters. They hadn't spoken about dreams in years, only projections. He walked past her and headed for the study, the dark Richwood sanctuary where the real performance began, the late-night email check, the simulated engagement with global markets. But tonight, he didn't turn on the monitor. He just sat in the leather chair, breathing the expensive air, feeling the weight of the suit, the weight of the expectations tailored precisely to his 42-year-old frame. He realized his exhaustion wasn't fatigue from working long hours. It was the exhaustion of continuous acting. He was tired of playing the character named successful husband and provider. The character's lines were boring, the plot predictable, and the compensation no longer worth the emotional labor. The question of courage wasn't just about admitting failure. It was about forcing Maria to confront the lie, too. She had made her life choices based on the solid, undeniable reality of his trajectory. He was the anchor. If he pulled that anchor up, she wouldn't just drift. She would be forced to navigate waters she hadn't prepared for. That fear, the fear of destroying her sense of security, was the last great inhibitor. It wasn't noble altruism. It was cowardice disguised as concern. He knew, deep down, that if he stayed, the slow erosion of his soul would eventually infect the entire household anyway. The performance would grow sloppy. The silent frustration would turn into snapping impatience, and the resentment would leak out in ways far crueler than a simple, honest confession. He stared at his hands. They had built this life. They had signed the mortgages, shaken the deals, typed the emails that locked him into the gold cage. And now, these same hands felt powerless to unlock it. He needed a pilot project. He couldn't confess the macro lie. Not yet. He had to start small, practicing the truth on minor details until the muscle of honesty developed. The next morning, he had a breakfast meeting scheduled with a colleague he actively disliked, purely for networking maintenance. A waste of 2 hours and genuine mental bandwidth. It was a required duty, part of the busy, important persona. He opened his phone, went to his calendar, and stared at the meeting entry. 7:30 a.m. power breakfast. This was it. The first silent act of defiance. The first word of the truth, told only to the glowing screen. He didn't reschedule. He didn't invent an emergency. He just hit delete event and watched the 2-hour block of his life instantly clear. For a moment, the lack of commitment felt like a physical absence, a vertigo of freedom. He had just created a space for himself. 2 hours of nothing, purchased with the currency of unapologetic truth. He didn't know yet what he would do with those 2 hours. Maybe he would drive aimlessly. Maybe he would sit in silence in a cheap diner, watching the people who hadn't mastered the art of the expensive mistake. It didn't matter. What mattered was the decision. The fight wasn't about the market or the career anymore. It was about reclaiming time, reclaiming space, one deleted event at a time, proving to the man in the mirror that he still had the agency to say no to the life that was killing him. He still had the courage, buried deep beneath the veneer of success, to prioritize his own survival over everyone else's expectations of his competence. And that was the only way this whole catastrophic mistake could ever turn into a future worth living. The agency he finally claimed felt less like freedom and more like a heavy, industrial-grade wrench. It was the tool he had to use to smash the polished structure he lived in, and the noise it made was loud only in his own head. He started small, but the impact was seismic. That mandatory quarterly review dinner with the Singapore team? Cancelled. Not postponed, not rescheduled for a better time. Cancelled. He sent the email at 4:30 p.m., signed off, and walked out of the office before 5 p.m. for the first time in 15 years. The world did not end. The market did not collapse. The office manager called him on his cell, her voice thin with panic, needing an explanation for the sudden deviation from the holy schedule. He gave her 3 words: personal matter, urgent. He didn't elaborate. He didn't owe her the truth, that the urgent personal matter was the sound of his own nervous system short-circuiting. The hard part wasn't the professional friction. Those emails and phone calls were just noise, easily muted. The hard part was the silence that followed. It was the vast, empty space where the anxiety used to reside, a silence that felt less like peace and more like a vacuum. For 2 decades, his identity had been forged in the heat of constant pressure. Now, without that heat, he felt soft, undefined, and profoundly guilty. Guilt wasn't just an emotion. It was a learned reflex of success. Successful men don't rest. They optimize. They expand. To stop was to admit weakness, to admit that the entire structure, The mortgage, the private school tuition, the retirement projections, was dependent on him continuously ignoring the pain in his chest. He got home at 5:45 p.m. The sun was still high. His wife, Sarah, was in the kitchen, sorting groceries. She paused, the carton of eggs suspended over the counter, and just looked at him. Not happily. Just looking. "Everything all right?" she asked. It wasn't a question about his day. It was a question about the deviation. His early arrival was an anomaly, a sign of failure or bad news. He nodded, forcing a casualness he didn't feel. "Just a slow day. Cleared my desk." She knew better. She knew his desk was never clear. The tension built over the next week. He continued to prune the schedule. He delegated meetings he used to covet. He started answering emails with single sentences instead of lengthy, validating paragraphs. He began to look like a man who was actively withdrawing resources from the empire he had built. One Friday night, after the kids were finally asleep and the house settled into a heavy quiet, Sarah brought him a glass of scotch and sat down across from him, skipping the small talk. "The Henderson contract," she started, her voice level, professional, the voice she used when discussing the financial planner's projections. "Did you really hand that off to Greg?" "I did. That was your biggest deliverable for Q3. The bonus depends on that." He stared into his drink, tracing the condensation. "The bonus is immaterial, Sarah. I need a break." "A break or a different job?" she pressed. "Because we're 42. We don't get to take breaks right now. We consolidated last year. We took on the vacation home. This isn't the time to get sentimental about the hours." She wasn't being cruel. She was reciting the covenant they had signed 20 years ago, the unspoken agreement that his exhaustion was the fuel for their security. "I can't do the hours anymore," he finally admitted, the words tasting metallic. "I'm physically done. I've been running on fumes for 6 months, and the fumes are toxic now." She paused, considering this new data point, the vulnerability of the machine she relied on. "So, what does done look like? Do we sell the house? Do we pull the kids out of private school? Because your idea of done means tearing down the scaffolding that supports every decision we've made since 2005. He saw her fear clearly, the fear of dissent. They hadn't just acquired wealth. They had acquired habits, expectations, and a social position that felt permanent. To scale back wasn't just a financial adjustment. It was a public declaration of defeat in the arena of modern ambition. "It looks like survival," he countered softly. "It looks like proving that my value isn't tied to the P&L statement. It looks like figuring out what happens when I actually have time to think, instead of just react." He wasn't sure what he would find in that quiet space. Maybe insight, maybe genuine peace, or maybe just the crushing realization that he had sacrificed everything for a life he hated, only to discover that without the relentless pursuit, he was just a tired man sitting alone in a very expensive, silent room, terrified of what came next. The real danger wasn't running out of money. It was running out of time to fix it before the silence drove him mad, before the realization hit that he had burnt the best years of his life achieving a state of exhaustion. And now, at 42, the only commodity he truly had left to spend was the courage to admit he'd made a catastrophic error, an error that now threatened to dismantle their entire shared future. He had to pivot, but pivoting at this altitude required jettisoning ballast, and the ballast often looked exactly like the woman sitting across from him, holding their shared life together. He sat across the table, not seeing her, but seeing the architecture of the life they had built. The mortgage, the mutual friends, the carefully curated vacations. The silence that tasted like trust, but was actually just habit. The question wasn't if he hated the life. The question was how much of the hate was directed at the builder. He had achieved every metric of success laid out by men 20 years his senior. He had the title, the salary, the prestige. He had the exhaustion that served as a moral badge, proof of effort. But now, that badge felt heavy, cold, and utterly meaningless. It was not a foundation. It was a mausoleum for his 20s and 30s. The pivot required courage, not capital. He had plenty of capital, locked up in assets he no longer cared for. But courage was the depleted resource. Courage meant looking the woman he loved, the woman who had sacrificed her own smaller, quieter dreams to support his massive public one, in the eye and saying, "I made a mistake. All of this is a lie." It wasn't just about changing jobs or moving cities. It was about tearing down the identity they both recognized. The sheer weight of the sunk cost was what kept him pinned down. At 42, you don't just walk away from a career. You walk away from the person everyone, including yourself, believes you are. He watched her sip her coffee. She was talking about their daughter's college applications, the logistics of the next 5 years. The plans were flawless, a perfect trajectory based on his steady income and upward mobility. To derail that, to introduce chaos into that predictable, safe framework, felt like an act of profound selfishness, even cruelty. The irony was terminal. He felt cruel staying silent, watching her invest her future in his crumbling facade. The silence wasn't protecting her, it was postponing the inevitable crash. He realized too late wasn't a measure of chronological time, it was a measure of inertia. The moment you decide it's too late, it becomes too late. The moment you decide you still have a flicker of choice, the clock resets, albeit with higher stakes and less energy. He had wasted the years of explosive energy, the years when failure was cheap and recovery was fast, building a prison. Now, he had to use the years of disciplined, finite energy to pick the lock. It was terrifying. The thought of starting over, not in a sexy, entrepreneurial way, but in a quiet, anonymous way, stripped of the corporate title and the network, was repellent to the ego he had cultivated. But the alternative, the daily grind against his own soul, was physically sickening. His exhaustion was not a lack of sleep. It was the friction of living an unauthentic life. He looked at the gold band on her finger, reflecting the kitchen light. That band represented their shared contract. He had upheld his end, providing security, stability, predictability. But the contract didn't account for the death of the provider's soul. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't afford to pivot immediately. The financial infrastructure was too brittle to shock. But he could stop performing. He could stop pretending the exhaustion was noble. The first step of the demolition wasn't the dramatic announcement. It was the quiet confession to himself. I am failing. Not failing at the job, but failing at living. He put his coffee cup down. The clink was sharp in the quiet kitchen. He cleared his throat. This wasn't the moment for a monologue, only for the opening statement of a painful, necessary negotiation. He didn't want to destroy the life they had built. He wanted to tear down the walls of the cage so they could both see the horizon again, even if it meant standing in the cold, unprotected wind for a while. We need to talk, he said, the words dry and immediate. Not about the bills or the itinerary, about the cost. She stopped mid-sip, her eyes, usually soft with domestic routine, sharpening instantly. She saw the change in him, the shift from controlled fatigue to absolute dread. She didn't look surprised. Perhaps she had been waiting for the confession longer than he realized he needed to make it. The real courage wasn't in leaving. It was in staying and admitting the structure was flawed, forcing them both to face the rubble. He was 42. It wasn't too late to change the course, but it was too late to keep deceiving the person who held his compass. The only meaning left to find was the meaning in the mess he was about to create, and the terrifying, uncertain freedom on the other side. He took a breath, preparing to finally spend the only commodity he had left. Raw, terrifying honesty.